Hello,
Good.
good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Transformative Leadership webinar presented with Nexus. I'm Thomas Cook. I am a program manager with Nexus. So just to get started, feel free to ask questions at any point during the webinar. Just you should have the chat or the function to be able to talk out loud. So feel free to ask questions out loud or enter them in the Q&A, and then I can ask them. Um, if you are interested in registering for the course, if you do so before March 15th, we do have a 20% off discount. So I will go ahead and introduce Drew. Drew is a lean specialist and instructor with Nexus. He will be leading the Transformative Leadership course. So with that, I'll go ahead and Drew, take.
Thanks, Thomas. So again, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us and taking some time out of your busy schedules. Greatly appreciated. We're talking about transformative leadership today, a subject that I would hope has great interest in every organization. Because one thing is certain is change is going to continue, and organizations have to adapt, and they need to create an adaptive culture. So this will also give you a peek to the program that Thomas was just referring to. For some of you, like Peggy, I think you attended my old Lean Leadership program back some time ago. This is kind of more focusing on the behavioral side, the soft skill side, and so much the tools of Lean. So we'll get started. First thing, just what's a definition that we can use for transformative leadership. So this one will serve our purposes. It's a leadership approach that causes change in individuals and entire social systems, entire organizations, or even social systems within larger organizations. And we don't just will people to change, we got to really influence them to change. And very necessary in that objective is to provide an inspirational purpose. And we'll talk about inspirational purpose at several points of this brief webinar. So, there's probably other definitions for the term, but I think this one will serve our purposes. Now, why do this? I'm a firm believer if we can't explain why we want organizations to do certain things, then we should reconsider what we're trying to get them to do. If we can't articulate the potential benefits to organizations, then we should reconsider what we're proposing or recommending or suggesting. So why do this? I believe my hypothesis is organizations that have created a flexible, responsive culture, and of course, culture is made up of the individuals of that organization who do not fear the future, don't fear change, will most likely succeed. Where those that are paralyzed by organizational inertia will not. I highlight most likely. There's no guarantees in business, right? There's nothing, such thing as 100%. But I do believe organizations that can adapt are going to be more likely to succeed than those that can't. And, business literature is littered with examples of companies some huge companies that fell mightily because of their inability to adapt to changing times. What we're not talking about here is, a crystal ball. We're not asking leaders of organizations to have some accurate crystal ball, but they should be keenly aware of circumstances that are changing, externally in their markets that they're servicing, and as well as internally. Kind of keeping a close eye on conditions and circumstances that are changing internally that would, predicate some sort of change effort to kind of get back on track or to correct or overcome. So, very briefly, I do believe this with everything in my heart, given 40 years of working with different organizations. Now, this term culture gets bantered about quite a bit, so let's put a definition to that. It's a set of shared attitudes, values, goals, and practices that characterizes an institution, organization, or group. I've heard people refer to culture as how groups, behave when no one's looking. That's another maybe more snappy way of putting it. But again, this will serve our purpose. And the question that has to be asked is who defines culture? And some people say, "Oh, the people do." Well, to some degree, yes, but it's really leadership. And we probably all in our careers have experienced where We've seen the norms of a group, even it could be, you know, like a department, that changed because of the change of leadership. And then people started adapting to that, thinking, well, I guess this is what the boss expects now. And it's just human nature to do that. So it's imperative on organizations to have leadership that have the requisite skills and exhibit the behaviors and the mindsets for change. So I kind of always like this little expression from E.G. Toyota. At one point was running the Toyota Motor Company, and obviously a family member. Spirit creates culture, which in turn creates results. And, you know, some of you may know, we often point to Toyota as a sustained application of lean concepts and really an adaptive culture. You know, they are fantastic at you know, developing the problem solving and process improvement skills of their associates over time. And those are two very important skills if you want an adaptive culture, right? And you know, I never worked at Toyota, but you know, some colleagues have, and I've read some of the history. And it's been interesting whenever Toyota has run into problems, which they have at certain periods in the past, often hitting front pages of newspapers. They go back and get like family members more engaged if they weren't at that time, because the family was always seen as the keepers of the spirit of the culture, and you know, not so much the tools. And that goes back to like the 1950s when they started embarking on their journey. So spirit creates culture, which in turn gets results. We can't just will the results. We've got to kind of create the circumstances to allow the results to come to fruition. The objective of the course, the Transformative Leadership course, is, I believe, again, from my experience over the years, organizations do not tend enough to the human factors. Again, we kind of seemingly come across as trying to will people to change, will people to improvement, and we ignore human nature. And the organizations that do well with this, and there's not a lot of them that have been able to do this over a sustained period of time, like decades. I think those are the ones that understand it and attend to the needs of humans when they're going about affecting change at any scale. So we'll talk about those in the program much more deeply than I have in previous programs for the university. Not that I didn't want to, but you know, everyone seemed to be enamored by the tools. And I think more and more are realizing there's more than just the tools. Tools are an enabler, but there's bigger obstacles that we've got to overcome. They're really the basis of human nature. So that leads us to then, if we understand those factors, we can then figure out an approach, a better approach to any change effort of any scale. As any leader, you know, we need a set of skills and behaviors that help promote this culture that we're suggesting. And this is interesting to me too. Over the years, a lot of leaders are thrust into leadership positions, sometimes working their way up through the ranks, you know, the proverbial ranks, and have never really been given the opportunity to develop the skills and behaviors in a deliberate way, which always kind of struck me as interesting, because I kind of grew up in a corporate management program at General Electric in the 1980s. And we had specific training on skills and behaviors, and we had to exhibit those, and we did all kinds of role plays, and then they would watch us in interacting with our folks. It was it was a multi-year program that I participated in. 3 years. I spent 3 years on that program. And, you know, but afterwards, my observation was not many organizations do that. They don't invest in the development of their leaders, and particularly on the soft skills. Some large organizations do. I've encountered few, but not nearly as many as I would have hoped for. I also like to try to make every program that I put on application-based as best as I possibly can, whether it be in a classroom environment or remote. So I'm offering a roadmap, step-by-step. I kind of like step-by-step methodologies. It seems to help people, give them a little structure to follow. And I'm hoping that the participants in the program will initiate their, a plan, their roadmap as part of the program. Of course, they got to kind of go off back to their organizations and make it happen and get others involved. But, I always try to make sure people walk out with something tangible that they can walk out the door with. So that's my expectation and hope, is that, they'll kind of follow those steps as much as they can in the forum of a classroom or again remote. Recognizing we don't always have the right people in the room to make all the decisions that go into creating that roadmap. And we're going to do this through a combination of lecture, videos, a lot of group discussions. I'm a firm believer that participants in any program can learn probably more from each other than they do from me, given the vast experience that people are bringing to these programs. Got some breakout exercises to work on the roadmaps. That's why I'm encouraging groups, companies that bring a group, like of 3 people. I've always done that with previous programs. So when you get those breakout exercises, I think you get a lot more accomplished if you have 2 or 3 folks from your organization. Strongly recommend that. From all the programs I've delivered for the University of Michigan over the years, I think the organizations that took me up on that got the most out of those programs, as opposed to an individual coming in and kind of trying to do the best they can. And we have a case study, and it is not going to be Toyota. It's going to be a different organization that you might find interesting. I'll refer to at the end of this webinar. Any comments or questions so far?
None in the chat so far.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the challenge, this human nature to which I referred. We've known for, frankly, over 100 years about human behavior to make use of that information to help us, better approach change in general. Because that's what an adaptive culture represents, right? People able to change and embrace change. But we have a lot working against this as humans. One is human brain seeks certainty. This is deep rooted in the oldest parts of the brain. We'll get a little bit into the physiology and the program. And we have to understand that, that's part of why they stick to the known and familiar humans, because it's familiar and known. It's more certain to them. Where change of any scale can really generate a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst. So we need to understand that and counter that. And that's probably there's multiple reasons, but it's probably one of the biggest reasons why humans resist change. Now, you're dealing with humans and individuals, and we're all not alike. So the strength of the unwillingness to change will vary greatly among people. Another fact is humans are creatures of habit. It doesn't mean we can't create new habits. We just have to kind of unlearn and relearn habits. So we'll get into that in the program in more depth as well. It certainly would be great if everyone learned the proper habits and adapted, and adaptive abilities to adapt from a younger age, but very often they've not. And, they're going to have to unlearn and relearn, create new habits. It can be done. It's just going to take more energy and time and patience, which a lot of leaders and organizations don't tend to have. So these are just some of the, facts about humans, and it doesn't mean this should discourage us. We just need to recognize this so we can, come up with an approach for the organization and even individually that can help them get over some of these basic facts in this challenge. Kind of wrap this little part of the discussion up. I've been carrying this quote with me since around 1990, I believe, from a comic strip that is probably no longer in print, Pogo. The certainty of misery is better than the misery of uncertainty. Just ponder that for a moment. The certainty of misery is better than the misery of uncertainty. I can tell you honestly, a week does not go by when I'm working with organizations that this statement, I don't come back to this statement and think about it because of what I'm experiencing, the resistance that I'm experiencing from folks. There's other expressions of this, what is it? The devil you know is better than the devil you don't, something like that. But there's a lot of truth to this. The certainty of misery is better than the misery of uncertainty. And, when I work with organizations, I like to listen. I like to listen to their problems. And I try to see where we can kind of circle back to those and whatever we're prescribing or suggesting, maybe, some concept or tool, or just some change where we just kind of point an area out we need to improve or change. And they get a lot of pushback. I recall this. So even as much as people might complain, I just had this conversation with a quality manager over in the UK who just will not let us in her sandbox, quality management. And she also has, very importantly, a big part of the product development system, introducing new products. And she just, oh, no, go help the operations, go help everyone but her. And, even though she acknowledges that there's a lot of problems with the current launch process of new products, and she just said, oh, it's just a communication thing at the end. You can work on with one of her folks. It was nice of her to allow that. But as we all know, what rolls downhill, and what we find at the end of that process, product launching in manufacturing or production, the problems originated well before that, whether it be quality issues, missing items, information quality issues, or just plain, we don't even have the materials to run this. Who dropped the ball on that, So I thought of this a lot in my interactions with this director of quality the last few weeks. Continue on with the challenge, we also have to keep in mind humans are developmental models, very deep-rooted mental models that are necessary. They help us cope with the real world. The assumptions that we make based on kind of limited information allows us to survive, allows us to drive cars or even walk across the street, many other things. It's just the way the human brain works. So what do I mean by that is, we have internally this representation of the external reality that plays an important role in our quick decision making, and reasoning. And that's a good thing. Again, it helps us because they operate these mental models at tremendous speed, and it helps us to cope and assure our safety by filling in the blanks, basically. However, as good as that all is, it can distort our perception of reality. And that's a challenge that we have to overcome. In fact, studies have shown that up to 40% of what we see, only 40% comes through the eyes. The rest comes in kind of filling in the blanks again from our previous experiences, patterns we're expecting to see based on those experiences, memories. So we've got to keep that in mind. And if we're constantly aware of that, we can, again, come up with approaches to change in general that can help mitigate these facts. And I do believe there's things we can do about it. For example, replace the need for certainty in like a solution, the change itself, the end result of the change, the outcome, with certainty in the process, certainty and confidence in the process of coming up with that solution or that change to deal with whatever business condition requires it. I often share a story where a small business owner once, he and I were having quite a bit of friction at the time. He goes, you have an answer for everything. I said, actually, I do not. I said, and if any consultant or whatever comes in and tells you how to do things in your business, throw them out because they don't have all the answers. What we have, and I explained this to the gentleman, was that I have confidence in the process that we properly motivate people, properly inspire people, give them the methodologies and tools they can achieve great things. That's my certainty. That's where my confidence comes from. What they come up with, I have no clue. I may have some suggestions here or there based on things I've seen at other organizations, but it's really not about what I believe. It's, is a solution or the change. It's about what the people believe. So I believe others can get that same confidence just through practice, deliberate practice. and enough positive experiences. Humans want to repeat positive experiences and avoid negative ones. So we want them to have positive experiences with this, or as best as possible. So with enough practice, I think people can develop the same confidence as I do, working for, I don't know, countless businesses and countless number of people over decades. So I don't know if you agree with that, but people get better at change. They just do. We also have to provide a safe environment. Remember, human brain seeks certainty. Well, it's like a safety mechanism, and that's, again, it comes from the deepest part of the brain, the oldest part of the brain. So leaders have to provide a safe work environment where they're not fearful, and we'll bring up a Dr. Deming point in a moment. So the last thing I would point is, because of that mental models that people have that can distort reality, we need to teach people or groups of people how to learn to see, and leaders can help with all of this. We won't answer this on the brief webinar today, but you can start thinking about that, and some of you here, I'm sure, have a lot of experience, can probably answer these questions. A lot of what we encourage organizations to do goes back to the 1950s and the teachings of Dr. W. Edwards Deming. And, he had his 14 management points in one of his books. And number 8 was an interesting one to me: drive out fear so that everyone can work effectively for the company. And I had the opportunity to ask Dr. Deming 2 questions before he passed away, and I guess around 92 or 93. And one was number 8. I said, I don't understand this, and I already had at that point probably about 8 years experience in work, kind of a corporate America work environment. And he went on and just said, leaders instill fear in their words, sometimes unintentionally, and it's like, I never really thought of that, and how they go about interacting with the people, the terminology they use. And we've got to drive that out, because that'll keep us from adapting, keep us from changing. And that really hit me at that time. And I was much more, observant for where that happens, and sometimes it's just people's body language that you pick that up, you see. But it also emphasized, and this was the second question I asked him at another conference: plan, do, check, act. This age-old improvement methodology, and upon which all other improvement methodologies are based, and it originates with the scientific method. The difference between do and act: plan, do, check, act. Do, act sounds like the same thing. I asked him this and showed my ignorance there, which he disparaged me in front of about 800 people. But he says the do should be viewed as an experiment. And only after you check the effect of that experiment would you want to then act to make standard. And I said, okay, I get that, and that really ties in with the fear. If we go about a change in the spirit of experimentation, do it on a limited basis, do it safely, people are going to be more willing to change and experiment. So that was also a question I got to ask, and it tied right in into what his point number 8 is. So the good news is, I believe, if we can accept basic human nature and understand it for what it is, we can develop approaches that proactively overcome those. Whether they be innate, coming from the deepest, oldest parts of our brain, or learned obstacles that people just learned up to that point in their lives. And we can have a higher probability for success. Nothing's 100%, but I think we can have a higher probability for success. If we can identify the source of the resistance to change, and this is where it gets personal, we can come up with techniques, tactics that can help them, and then in turn help groups and ultimately the organization. So beyond kind of the physiology of the brain and its functions, we've had some classic models of motivation. That's what we have to do. We can't just will people to change. We have to inspire them and motivate them. So we've had some classic models that I always like to go back to. Some people criticize me, it's from Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's from the 1940s. So what? Old doesn't make it bad, or out of date. It's still relevant today as it was when he first published it. Even Frederick Hertzberg's job enrichment factors date back to the 50s, the late 50s, middle to late 50s. And old doesn't make it bad. So there's a lot to be learned here. And then a third model I always like to kind of use is the personal model, personal system. And there's not a week that goes by when I'm interacting with organizations that I don't refer to all three of these, trying to find solutions, or maybe not solutions, but, help me pinpoint where this person or group of people are coming from when they're kind of resisting ideas and trying things. Still trying to figure out that quality director, though, where her source is coming from. I haven't figured that out yet. And our objective is not just to change and have people change once, but develop the mindset and the skills that they're able to continually change over time, as needs arise. And that, actions beget, habits, which then beget culture. So that's what we're after. Can you really catch the change habit? I think to some level we all can, but we all have our, areas and some topics that maybe we can't. My wife would agree with that. So if we can, get enough people, and I'm not going to say 100%, but enough, I think in time, maybe even as much as 90% over time, a lot of time, I think we can get there. And there's a few organizations that have shown that to be true. But again, it requires us to recognize, understand, acknowledge that, hey, there's some things we've got to deal with first in terms of our approach to all this to help people learn and create habits. And as I mentioned a moment ago, we've known that for 100 years, over 100 years. So it's just some basics, humans don't change for the sake of changing. We got to give them inspirational purpose. So there's that term again. And it often amazes me when I ask organizations, so why do you want to do lean, or why do you want to do continuous improvement, or why do you want this culture, that you're saying, that you're describing? And they really can't articulate it in any tangible way that if it doesn't make sense to me, it probably won't make sense to their associates, their team members. So you gotta have a reason for change, and it's gotta be a real reason. I don't know if people remember the old expression, a burning platform. You can't expect the organizational change unless you have a burning platform. And I'm okay with that. I don't quite like the terminology, but it's got to be a real cause. I used to watch, and I still do, organizations make up causes. We got to change because of this. And I'm like, humans are kind of smart. They're going to see through deception pretty darn quickly. You need to have a good reason. And doing it because your neighbors are doing it, or you went to a conference, those aren't good reasons. We need a good reason, first and foremost. And we've known that since the psychology of learning from Edward Thorndike, who has been referred to as the father of educational psychology. And he published a book titled The Psychology of Learning in 1913. And, gotta have purpose. And really what he taught us still all applies. The only thing that has changed in recent decades is now we kind of know a little bit more how the brain works, what's going on there, but it doesn't change what we've known for over 100 years. And as I repeated, and my repeated refrain, organizations need to know this, because if they don't, they will not go about any change effort in the appropriate way. And I can give you, tons of examples of that. I get phone calls, my people aren't getting it. What aren't they getting? They're just not getting this continuous improvement stuff. I sent everyone to a class, and they all had to do one project. And I'm like, so you really think that's enough to create deep understanding and skill and habit? And they say, well, not from the tone of your voice. I'm gathering it's not. I'm like, not even close. So we have a lot to learn from the psychology of learning. A week doesn't go by, I'm not thinking of those, actually, before I show up. And so we've known what it takes to ultimately form habits. Reforming habits is, again, challenging. More time, effort, energy is needed, but it can be done, but difficult. And there's been a lot, on habit, a lot of books on habit forming, and, there's great stories of how entire societies, our nation have had to create habits. There's some classic stories about how did in the US, they would get people to brush their teeth as a regular routine because it wasn't regular. I think up till like post-World War II, if I recall the story. And how did they do that? There's a lot to learn from those. Marketing in general, basically. There's a lot to learn from marketing techniques. And also from, this has been interesting in some conferences in the last 8 years or so. A lot to be learned from addictive therapy and changing habits there. So we'll cover some of that as well. And what I've learned too is without a sufficient foundation of trust, this will never be able to develop an adaptive culture. Modest issues of trust we can, because some of the techniques and processes we put in place to help with like engagement will help overcome modest issues of trust. But I've been in a few companies that I had to walk out of after a few years because it just the deep-rooted trust issues from years and years past, we just could not overcome. Nor were the leaders of that organization willing to put the time and effort into it, sadly. So we got to have trust. Got to have trust. Any questions about or comments about what we just covered there? Before we get into skills and behaviors and some of the specifics. And some of you have been at this for a long time. Actually, Peggy dropped off, I think. Okay, no comments there, Thomas? Nothing in the chat?
Nothing in the chat.
Everyone's being shy. So, there's always exceptions to everything I say, but I think it's pretty safe statement to say people aren't born with these skills. At least the vast, vast, vast majority are not. So we have to develop those, and we'll go over those skills. Generally speaking, we're talking about servant leadership, which is, from a mindset, is very different than the old school command and control, dictating kind of leader or manager. I wouldn't even call that a leader. Organizations like Toyota get this. If you ever interacted with Toyota leadership, they understand they're there to serve the value-added associates, team members. But how do you do that and do it well? It's not about being polite. There's certain skills. Empathy, listening, commitment to the personal growth of others is huge, huge. And if I'm insecure as a leader or manager in an organization with my status, I'm not going to help others develop. Fortunately, I'm seeing more and more leaders understanding the importance of this and at least trying to develop others. I was always taught you're as strong as your team, and the stronger your team is, the better you'll be as a manager. So if you think about what we're saying here, helping others develop their skills and abilities, ultimately their mindsets and developing the habits, generally speaking, the personal growth of others, we're talking about I'll use this expression, management by means. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of the expression managing by objective. It's an old management concept that dates back to the 1950s from Peter Drucker, and a lot of people misunderstood what his initial intention was. Managing an objective is senior management sets goals and will people to meet those goals. I encountered it a lot in the 80s when I was working at General Electric, and I even used to ask questions. I was like, "This isn't right." They're like, "No, you're going to learn differently on program." But I watched and continue to watch manager after manager. They think that's their job. Set the goal, the challenge, and then walk away. Let the people figure out how to do it. And it's like, well, do they even have the skills to meet that goal? Have you given the means? That's a huge distinction. Are we providing the environment? Are we providing them with the skills, the methodologies, the tools to be successful in meeting whatever the objectives are? That's a very important distinction. So what skills do we need? Obviously communication in general, got to be good listeners. I think a leader's got to be very organized, looking ahead. That's what I mean by planning. Got to be looking ahead. Can't just be engaged in the moment. How far ahead depends on your role. With that whole inspirational purpose, you got to have motivational skills, keen observation skills to see when circumstances are starting to change that need to be addressed. And there's that trust thing. And I always thought trust was this, kind of thing that just naturally happened with between parties. And I learned very early, because I was horrible at it, that it's a skill that can be developed. And there's techniques that you can use. Of course, if we're developing others, we got to be able to coach them, have good coaching skills. And, skills in what they do and running the business, whatever task they're responsible for. But certainly problem solving and process improvement skills, because that's what we're talking about with continuous change and adaptive cultures. And I believe a leader should be pretty good at those skills. Maybe not experts. They don't need to be experts, but they got to know the game that we're playing, problem solving and process improvement. If they have no experience in that, how can they coach others? And I've seen that, quite a bit, where folks get promoted to a certain position of authority and never really were very good problem solvers and process improvers. No blame on them. They just didn't really maybe have the opportunity. And, they struggle, developing their groups, their teams. So, I don't know if I've ever seen like if you think of athletics, I think pretty much every coach or manager probably played that game at some point, earlier in their lives. Maybe weren't very good. I'm not saying you got to be the best baseball player, Hall of Famer to become a coach. Sometimes people would argue the opposite. They would make a worse coach. You had to have played the game and understand the game and have some level of skill and recognize, be self-aware, recognize your shortcomings in that area. Because bottom line is a leader is a role model. I've had leaders tell me, not often, but I don't want to be a role model. Like, we have to find another role for you then. Because humans will kind of mimic what they see their leader is doing, the skills they're exhibiting as well as the behaviors. And then they kind of think, oh, that must be how I'm supposed to act. I've seen subcultures in organizations change within weeks, just simply with the change of a leader. And not always in a good way, most often in a bad way. Beyond skills is behaviors, and being a role model again. You got to be passionate. If you're not passionate, for whatever it is you're asking folks to do, you can't expect them to be passionate. You can't delegate passion. Got to be committed to it. Change is difficult, and it's very easy to go the easy path and of least resistance. And it's like, you got to be committed to it and explain periodically to people why this is important. I mentioned a moment ago about looking ahead. All leaders have to be looking ahead. Most of the team members are engaged in the moment, so leaders have to be looking ahead. And how far ahead depends on your role. And humans, because they can see through deception, you better be authentic. You've had countless folks, nod, yeah, we want to do continuous improvement, yeah, we want to do problem solving, yeah. And they're not. It's just words, and people will see that quickly because they don't see the actions supporting the words. And here's a tricky one: humility. The humble leader. Thought leaders were supposed to have all the answers. I thought that at a young age because that's what I saw in movies. And I was again taught on this management program I referred to, no, you don't need to know the answers, you need to know the questions, because no one has all the answers. And if you do come across as having all the answers, you will lose your credibility and you might as well pack up your bags and leave. That was a quote from a very kind gentleman giving me some advice. Transformative leader has to be flexible. There's more than one way to get to your destination, and we've got to allow that flexibility, let people kind of find their own way. And certainly collaboration is important, especially to get over those mental models that I referred to. Most change should be done as a small group or even a large group activity. Get those different perspectives. That requires being very collaborative. Obviously, my quality director I was referring to is not very collaborative. And got to be supportive, and not just in words, again, in action, providing necessary time or allowing people to develop the skills as needed, and show respect. This was an interesting one. This is the foundation of Toyota's whole system, the Toyota Way. And we had some Toyota execs or an exec present at one of our conferences years ago, and they said, "What is this respect for people thing?" And people didn't understand that. Actually, I think the question was, why doesn't Toyota write a book about Toyotas? And they said it would be about 3 pages long because it's all about respect for people. That was actually the question and first answer. And then everyone's like, what does this mean? And he went on to explain how organizations disrespect their people, leaders disrespect people, often unintentionally, kind of going back to Deming's fear, driving fear out point. So we got to be very sensitive, very aware, self-aware if we're being disrespectful for people. And then use intrinsic rewards. Everyone doesn't need an economic reward. Just succeeding and doing better are things that motivate people. That comes right out of Abraham Maslow's model. So we need leaders, transformative leaders, if a leader's going to be a transformative leader, to have the skills on the previous slide, and they need to exhibit these behaviors in a consistent way. Otherwise, they'll just generate a lot of confusion and mistrust. And if this is different, these skills and behaviors, in particular the behaviors, if these are different than a current manager's demeanor, that's okay. They just need to be upfront. Because I get this all the time. I'm not like this. What are people going to think? I'm going to be changing. Let them know upfront by what you're doing and why, and be open, be humble, be open to input from them. But first and foremost, let them know why you feel you need to change. Not easy for folks to do that, particularly in leadership roles, right? That requires a lot of humility. So those are kind of the soft stuff, that we cover in the program. And then here's the roadmap. It's not the only roadmap, but this is kind of what I suggest. How you answer these 6 steps or respond to these 6 steps is dependent on you and your organization, your circumstances. But this gives us a framework to at least think this through. And this is no different than what I do with any organization I work with over long periods of time. Why do you want to do this? And how do we formulate that in a succinct way that is inspirational, motivational to most people in the organization? Again, I don't go for 100% because I've been around too long. I used to think you could get 100%. I've lowered my expectations slightly there. Everything's a process. Engagement is a process. So we have to develop a process or processes for people to get involved and get engaged. Then we have to kind of spark them to get engaged. We have to give them reasons, opportunities. So give them challenges. Explain the reasoning behind a challenge, why we need to change something. And then that provides them an opportunity. And, so organizations are pretty good at telling, tasking people, go improve this, not always with inspirational purpose. And again, we're looking at not just that one-off here. We're looking for our ongoing. So we need processes for engagement. If I have an idea, what do I do with it? How do we pursue that? Whether we follow through on the idea or not, I need to know. I need to be involved in that. It's all process. And it's, again, not just a one-off. Opportunities for engagement, as we'll see on an upcoming slide, should be never-ending. But here's, again, where people really miss it. Number 4, the coaching support. And to me, it's probably the biggest obstacle organizations have. They don't have sufficient coaching capacity. We all need help. I got tons of help learning these concepts decades ago. I had mentors, coaches for everything we were asked to do. And unfortunately, we kind of task people, here, go do this. We don't even give them a tool. Here, this will help you, PDCA or some version of that. That'll help you. With any tool, you don't just pick it up and not learn and figure out how to use it. You got to have someone showing you and helping you. So number 4 is so critical. The good news there is, we start off without a lot of coaching support in organizations, but now it's sort of, if we go about this in a deliberate, careful way, we can increase that relatively quickly and create like this snowball effect. This organization I'm going back to in the UK, I was there last year, mid-year, I'm going back. I'm using the folks from the first go around to help provide coaching, where in the first round, they had maybe 2 people that were, well, actually 1, that could coach. They were capable of coaching. So we got to develop that capacity and be patient in doing it. Now, change is a process like anything else, so we have to manage it. And that, what I mean there is real, not just project management and all that. I'm talking about maintaining a keen ear to what is going on, in our culture. What are our associates in particular, telling us? That's often overlooked. Fortunately, more and more organizations are doing more like engagement surveys and doing them more frequent, of like subpopulations in the organizations, just to kind of keep that voice of the associate stakeholder, that information continually flowing. And then I've had this problem myself with organizations that I've worked with even over many years. They kind of lose their way. So step 6 is, once we get started, how do we continue it and how do we sustain it? Like succession planning is part of that. I have one company, I think we're up to year 9 now, and we just had a call earlier this week. Okay, let's go through unit by unit. It's a petrochemical company. Let's go through unit by unit. What changeover or turnover have we had in the leadership positions, and who are we bringing in there? Have they been through the program? Because we have this kind of program that we've been running for now, it'll be 9 years now, just to kind of get them acclimated. And then we have a support structure in place, a coaching support, but we got to make sure anyone put into newly into a leadership role, and often replacing someone that moved on, we got to make sure they're on board with this. Otherwise, they won't sustain. And I've seen my more than share of those. So again, it doesn't happen by chance. It really should be viewed as a management system. And by that, I mean a system of activities that leaderships perform at some frequency that can drive continuous improvement, And this is a model I use. It's not the only model, but here is like the engine. Plan, do, check, act. And like any engine, it needs some sort of energy or fuel to keep going. And that energy or fuel comes from the different activities that we're asking leaders to perform at some frequency, and most often engaging their team members in those activities. And my hypothesis is, as long as leaders do these, or most of these, I would say not all of them apply, though. I'd be hard pressed to figure out which ones don't. But I'm open to the possibility. But as long as leaders are performing those, then I think we got a chance that we can keep the engine going, the continuous improvement engine going. And again, that develops the culture. The more we practice, the more we can get to that ideal of a culture, adaptive culture. And then just in this model, I'm not going to go over this model in any depth today, but there's that purpose again, that direction and purpose piece right there. Without that, it's happened to one of my organizations that kind of lost their way after eight years or so. They kind of lost communicating this part, and the wheel stopped. Not completely, slowed down, we'll just say. Just emphasizes the importance of that part of the system. So these, again, it's a system. There's other models out there. Toyota has their model with columns and a roof. But it's just a set of activities that we're asking leaders to perform and engaging their folks in doing so. And I do acknowledge we're asking leaders to do a lot more, right, than they probably have in the past. Maybe not a lot, but at least more. And a lot of people have overflowing plates, already of responsibilities. So we've learned over the years there's a few things that make this easier. Visual management being one of them. We can make things visual, problems visible, circumstances changing visible. That really makes it easier for management to recognize where they have to kind of take some action. And we have this other tool called Leader Standard Work that it can help leaders make those activities a routine over time. And we all need help creating new habits, and it's just a tool. Unfortunately, I'm always upfront about these things. I only about 50% on that tool. The ones that create it from scratch and stay with it, and it takes a couple months to create it from scratch, to be honest, they love it. They don't know how they live without it. But unfortunately, people don't put that time and effort into it. I got a great group right now from one company of 4 leaders. They're just doing great with this. And I keep asking, why are you doing so well? And they're like, this is going to help us. And every one of them was put into a leadership role within the last year or so, maybe 2, and they struggled. And they see this as a tool to help them overcome their struggles. So I'll take that any day. So again, none of this happens by chance. It's through deliberate practice of leaders. So to kind of wrap up, I mentioned a case study as part of the program design. And I could have picked Toyota, lots and lots of books on that, but I picked Pixar. I don't know if any Disney fans out there, but you'll recognize Pixar. They've been at it for 40 years, successful for 40 years. That's a pretty good run. And I put a qualifier on there so far. Nothing's guaranteed, but going forward, but very impressive. And it comes from a book called Creativity Inc. from Ed Catmull, who used to be, or was, I'm sorry, is a founder of Pixar from the very first, even before it was Pixar, from the very first moment. And a great book. He was an old Demonite from way back, great student of Dr. Deming, and he applied it in a very creative environment, right? Creating movies, digital, I guess, movies, computer-generated movies that are #1 in the box office every year. Every release is remarkable, and there's a lot to be learned from that. So I kind of took excerpts from the book and crafted a case study to stimulate some good breakout discussions with the group. Really, kind of get to at the end of the program, it's kind of hopefully kind of brings everything to a clear understanding. So if you're interested, get the book Creativity Inc. I don't know when it came out, like 2014, I believe. It's still around. I think he's kind of just an advisor to Pixar. But I thought it'd be a fun diversion from Toyota, which we tend to use most commonly. So that's kind of what we wanted to cover today. Just to summarize, organizations that have a creative, flexible, responsive culture and do not fear the future, will most likely succeed. No guarantees, but most likely to succeed. And when needs arise, they won't be as parallel or slow moving to respond. Leaders define culture and even subcultures. If I'm a manager of a department, I define that. And again, part of that, first and foremost, is providing inspirational purpose. We can't ignore the human factors. We need to understand them, accept them, and develop the techniques to work through them or help people work through them themselves. Transformative leaders need the skills and exhibit the proper behaviors, and that does not happen by chance. A lot of those activities that I was referring to in that model are basically opportunities to exhibit those skills and behaviors, right? So it's kind of, people say, you're like putting us on a stage. And I'm like, yeah, I am. Because none of this happens by chance. It's been my experience. It just doesn't happen naturally. And that's, I think most people that have been, on the front lines of change in organizations would agree with that. So you haven't had any questions yet, but we got a couple minutes. Anything on your mind at this point? Anything you agree with, disagree with? Looks like we lost a few people.
So I have a question, Drew.
Uh-huh.
So you mentioned a few times about like individuals being more natural leaders or organizations having better like established processes or just more open to change. Like depending on where they land on the spectrum, do you have like certain methodologies or like approaches you emphasize more depending on like where they're at to start?
My general response to that question, it's a great question. Meet your learners where they are. Meet your learners where they are and the nature of learners. We actually cover this in the program. There's, active learners. There's, if you think about resistance, there's passive resistant people. There's willing learners. There's the people in the middle. So you got to meet them where they are and help them along. So if someone's a willing learner, I can be more directive, more deliberate in what I'm saying, and I know it won't be received inappropriately or, in a way that I don't intend. If a person's a reluctant learner, then I got to be very careful in the wording I use, give them maybe more freedom to kind of find their way, what I call value of self-discovery, that kind of thing. I love when sometimes people just come out and say, just tell me what you want me to do, Drew. And I'll be like, are you sure? Yeah. Okay. But they're the exceptions. Most of the time, people don't want to be told what to do. So you just kind of lay out the concepts and let them kind of find their way, what I call value of self-discovery. But there's a spectrum there of learners, and we have to meet them where they are. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah.
You're not, in a general sense. Any other comments from anyone, even from the U? You have an organization, Nexus. You can draw on that experience. I see someone in the chat here.
Yeah, question from Sydney. Is the leadership roadmap adaptable to different size organizations?
A great question, Sydney. My intention is yes. As part of those breakout exercises, I have the participants define what is their organization, and it could be a single team. It could be, like I'm a supervisor of a group. It could be a department. I'm a manager of a group, or an entire organization. So it can be any size, I believe. The principles apply in any sort of group dynamic of any size, any scope or scale. Any other thoughts on anyone? From anyone? Sean, you've been quiet. And you're not a University of Michigan person.
I am. Well, no, I did take the lean leadership class there.
Oh, okay. So you went through it too, huh? I'm sorry, I don't recall.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a lot more in the soft skills than the tools. You remember we talked a lot about tools like designing visual management, creating leader standard work. We're just talking more of the soft side.
Yep. This is the other end of the spectrum, right?
Which I would kind of get to in my various, dissertation, my pontification that you probably had to experience, but it wasn't so formal.
Right. Yeah. Definitely learning how to expand, off of that. I've been doing lean for almost 20 years now. So now it's time to really hone the chops on, engaging folks and figuring out those softer techniques that I need.
Yeah. I probably shared this in that program with your group. I did not know about, I knew a little bit about some of the people side. We had some of that in our management development program, but it dawned on me after 7 years, I was ill-equipped to deal with the people side of all this. So I went back to school. That's kind of what I always did, go back to study behavioral science. And that's where I was introduced to Edward Thorndike's psychology of learning. I'm like, oh my God. And I just wish I knew that 7 years, the prior 7 years, because I would have taken a much different approach and had a lot more success than, I firmly believe that, than I did. I mean, we had some good successes, but it could have been a lot better if I was better equipped.
Yeah. My I don't know if it's unfortunately or not, but my experiences so far has been like, all right, let me find the tough guy and get him on board, and then the rest of them have kind of followed.
It's a good approach, right? It's like go and find the biggest guy in the prison and
knock him down.
But if they're influential of others,
absolutely, once
they can help you.
That aha moment, it definitely helps.
I think that's a great, tactical approach. Absolutely. I've used that numerous times. Anyone else? Thank you for joining us today, Sean, then, as well. I appreciate it.
Oh, sure. No problem.
Ed, I believe, is not a University of Michigan person. Or is he? Oh, there's a chat.
No,
I'm just sending a chat out to everyone. If no questions come to mind at this moment, feel free to send them along and we can answer them later. I think is your point there, right?
Yep.
So I guess we'll wrap up then, Thomas.
Yep. And so again, mention the 20% discount code if you register prior to March 15th.
And if you are interested in coming, really heed my suggestion of bring a group, 2, 3. It just, I know Sean, you went, I don't know if you came with some folks to the Lean Leadership one, or you came alone, but the people that were there with some of their colleagues, I think got a lot accomplished.
Yeah, we came with a small group at the one company I was at. Now I'm at a different
good.
company, so we're starting to re-examine what they were initially shown what lean is, and kind of take it from a different perspective. They have a lot of Six Sigma thoughts in their head, and they think it's production, and so we're correcting some of that behavior. But
I'm hearing a lot of unlearning and relearning.
exactly, that's the phase we're in right now.
Good luck, sir.
Yeah, thanks. It's
Be
tough,
patient.
but we're getting there.
Yeah, you got to be patient.
Yeah.
Most will get there.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll wrap up. Thank you all for your time. Much appreciated, and hope to see you on campus.